Good afternoon, good morning, good evening for those of us joining virtually, and welcome to the Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum of the OECD for 2021. My name is Ingrid Barnsley and I am the Deputy Director for Environment at the OECD, and I have the pleasure to welcome the speakers and audience attending both in person and online for this event. The GGSD Forum is the OECD's flagship annual event on green growth. The overarching theme this year is a green recovery, rethinking the built environment and transport.
Recording in progress.
We will explore the role of COVID-19 recovery measures to build back better, to tackle the climate crisis and other environmental challenges. In many countries, the pandemic has also led to a rethink of urban design and transport. The forum will also address how to better align and design cities, as well as mobility of people and goods for a greener and more resilient future. And following up on the COP26 climate conference of the last 2 weeks, this is a timely opportunity to exchange with policymakers and experts on ambitious and concrete climate action in the areas of transport, cities and the built environment towards achieving net zero by mid-century. This year, we are also marking a 10-year anniversary of the OECD's own Green Growth Strategy, which was launched as a response to the global financial crisis to find new sources of green growth. The Green Growth Strategy is ever more relevant today as we aim for a green recovery. The GGSD Forum has two objectives. First is to facilitate multidisciplinary dialogue on policy issues relating to green growth and sustainable development. And second, to identify knowledge gaps and areas for future work. Now, we're sure that we'll be able to meet those objectives with the policymakers and experts we've managed to bring together for this event. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce the distinguished speakers for this high-level opening session. First of all, I have with me on behalf of the OECD, Rodolfo Lacey, the Director of Environment, also on behalf of the Secretary-General and the Deputy Secretary-General overseeing green growth at the organisation. I'm also delighted to have with me a range of other speakers whom I'll introduce one by one as they give their opening remarks. Some are joining us here on the panel, and you'll be able to see that, those of you who are joining virtually, and we also have some very distinguished guests with us online. I would like to now remind you all that interpretation is available in the 2 official languages of the organisation, should you wish. And with this, I'm really delighted to provide now the opening address of the Secretary-General of the OECD, Mathias, who cannot join us in person due to a last-minute change, but has provided his video remarks by way of video.
Chers collègues, chers amis, bienvenue au Forum 2021 de l'OCDE sur la croissance verte et le développement durable, où nous discuterons de la manière dont les mesures de relance de Covid-19 contribueront à rendre plus écologique le cadre bâti et les transports. This forum comes at a critical juncture for global action on climate. While there's been important progress, including new commitments made at COP26, much more needs to be done to put the world genuinely on a path to net zero emissions by 2050. Ensuring a green recovery is a major piece of the puzzle. Our latest analysis derived from the OECD Green Recovery Database found that 10% of recovery spending has at best a mixed or even a negative impact on the environment, and only a small proportion of recovery spending has actually a positive impact. We surely have to do better. We urgently need to align our recovery plans with net zero pathways, reorient financial flows and invest in a transition for the built environment and for the transport sector. OECD work has focused on identifying opportunities to optimize the strength and the quality of the recovery, including by making progress towards our shared environmental goals. This forum is a unique opportunity to discuss how policies, investments and behaviors relating to the built economy and transport can contribute to these goals. This year also marks the 10th anniversary of the OECD Green Growth Strategy. Initially aimed at finding new sources of growth after the global financial crisis, the strategy is today more relevant than ever. Let me highlight 3 priority areas where OECD work across different policy committees is helping countries achieve a green recovery in the built economy and transport sectors. First, in relation to urban mobility and transport. The pandemic triggered long-term impacts on mobility, offering important opportunities for decarbonization at urban, regional and global levels. For example, at the city level, local governments have been promoting cycling and investing in active and shared mobility infrastructure, improve public transport safety and accessibility, and low emissions options such as electric vehicles and scooters. These actions have the potential to accelerate climate change mitigation while improving wider well-being outcomes, with important related benefits on citizens' health and affordability, as well as equity of transport. This needs to continue, and where possible, it needs to be scaled up. The International Transport Forum found that ambitious transport decarbonization policies could reduce CO2 emissions by almost 70% by 2050 compared to 2015 levels. Encouraging behavioral change and harnessing green recovery measures to fast-track the decarbonization of transport will greatly accelerate the transition to sustainable mobility. Our latest analysis also shows that gradually increasing tax rates on kerosene can help create the conditions to decarbonize air travel and incentivize investment in green aviation technologies. Secondly, urban housing. Recovery from COVID-19 has accelerated the shift towards a new urban paradigm of more inclusive and smart cities, including a rethink on buildings and dwellings. Today, not all urban residents enjoy the same quality of housing. Recovery spending can help improve this. Cities and buildings can be redesigned to contribute to increased citizens' well-being, while also reducing pollution and carbon emissions. The OECD's horizontal project on housing identifies policy options to decarbonize the building sector, including through building codes for better energy efficiency, incentives for material innovation, and urban planning. Thirdly, tourism. The COVID-19 crisis offers an opportunity to fast-track the shift to greener and more sustainable models of tourism. This will imply adopting an integrated policy, industry, community approach, mainstreaming sustainable practices and business models, and implementing better tourism statistics to determine the desired type and scale of tourism appropriate for each destination. The OECD G20 Rome Guidelines for the Future of Tourism, endorsed by G20 leaders in Rome last month, highlight policy levers for government to restart the tourism industry while ensuring the sector's sustainable and resilient recovery. Il est urgent d'harmoniser les mesures prises dans de nombreux domaines d'action, qu'il s'agisse de la politique fiscale, de la tarification du carbone, des réglementations en matière d'efficacité énergétique, de l'aménagement du territoire ou de la politique du tourisme, pour n'en citer que quelques-uns. L'OCDE s'engage à jouer son rôle en continuant à contribuer à des niveaux d'ambition plus élevés en matière de réduction des émissions et en soutenant de meilleures approches pour assurer une reprise net zéro et résiliente en s'appuyant sur nos compétences pluridisciplinaires. Vous pouvez toujours compter sur l'OCDE en cette décennie d'action pour la croissance verte. Je vous souhaite une très bonne discussion. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Secrétaire Général CORMANN. With that, I'm delighted now to invite our scene-setting speaker for this first high-level panel. Young Tai Kim is the Secretary General of the International Transport Forum. The ITF provides the transport policy and economic advice of the organisation within the wider OECD family, and prior to his current role, Dr. Kim had a distinguished career in the civil service of his native Korea. We're delighted to have him with us to open the scene, so to speak, for this theme this year of rethinking the built environment and transport. Thank you, Dr. Kim.
Hello, everybody. Okay, I'm very honored to set the scene for you, and today I prepared some basic information about what's happening in the transport sector today. And the title is Green Recovery, Rethinking the Built Environment and Transport, and I will focus on the transport sector for you. In fact, before starting to explain a little bit about our predictions, and I would like to briefly explain about the role of the ITF. ITF is composed of 63 member countries, and we organize our annual summit in May, and we produce more than 60 reports every year. And among those 60 reports, we have some flagship publications, and one of them is our Outlook, Transport Outlook. And the latest version was 2021 version. We launched it in May this year at our summit. And according to that publications, and basically we can expect in 2050, our transport demand will more than double in passenger sector and freight sector. Because in ITF, we very much count on our modeling capacity, and we predict something that might come in up to 2050. But we compare the current situation and the future situation about our the transport issues. And in fact, in general, we have the main themes in the transport sector today, and we focus on decarbonization and also digitalization, and universal access and inclusion, and connectivity and safety and health. And also in terms of the CO2 emissions, the transport CO2 emissions will grow 16% if we continue with this current rhythm. So we can easily expect that our situation will be worse than now if we do not really take actions together. So we will continue to work together in the OECD and also with the international the partners. And we made 6 recommendations for policymakers in our Outlook, Transport Outlook 2021, because knowing that if we do not do anything, our situation will be slightly worse than now. But if we take active actions, our situation can be a little bit better. But if we take ambitious actions, and the analysis shows that we can even reduce our CO2 emissions nearly 70% in 2050. So the task that we urged our policymakers to pay attention to is align COVID-19 recovery package to revive the economy, combat climate change, and strengthen equity. And also, government should shift the priority to improving accessibility. So we can compare the notion of transport in the past and the notion of transport now, and even in the future, because in the past it was government-led, but nowadays it's more or less customer-led, and we have our cell phones, and we can still create a lot of kind of platforms where we can really combine different modes of transport. It really enhances economy of time and economy of money. So we have to totally have a different notion of transport compared to the past right now. And also, we have to target different transport sectors with strategies and reflect their specific decarbonization, the potentials. In general, urban transport, maybe we pay more attention to solve the problem in urban areas, but for regional and intercity travels, still we have to think about more ambitious strategies to improve the situation. And we also have to support innovation to accelerate technological breakthroughs needed to decarbonize transport. And intensify collaboration for sustainability with non-transport sectors and between private and public sectors. So in fact, we have some potentials and challenges ahead of us, and I summarized the potentials and challenges. I updated my PPT, but this PPT was a bit the old version, so I prepared the new content for you. And in fact, in terms of the potential, we can think about various platforms. As I mentioned, the platforms can be connected to other platforms to create synergies. And also, we can combine strategic goals. There are several areas like decarbonization and digitalization and accessibility issues, but it's not separated, and they are all interconnected. So we can still focus on combination of different policy goals, and we can accelerate the global cooperation. Sometimes we feel that there are too many duplications and overlappings on the similar questions, but I think if we think differently, that means that the global community is focusing on very important questions together. So how we can coordinate with the counterparts in the global community is a very important thing. And also we have challenges. Even in each member country, and even in each country, there should be a coordination and governance issues, because at the COP, for example, Ministry of Environment, they participate in negotiation and they set the goals, but in the end, we have to count on a lot of different levels of actors, like local governments and industries, and even individuals. And we know that we can realize technological development, but at the same time, we have to change the behaviors of the passengers and citizens. And unless people are convinced, it's not easy to create synergies. So coordination and governance issue is really important. And also change of infrastructure, easier said than done. And we usually say that we have to do this and do that, and we can create some special lanes for bicycle and motorcycle. But in fact, existing infrastructure was not designed for that, because when we make an investment for infrastructure, it's for decades, and it's for even more than decades. So in fact, how we can introduce the notion of universal design, and that's maybe a great challenge for the future, because we cannot change infrastructure just tomorrow because we think differently today. So we have to think about that. And also, there is a very complicated procedure to realize infrastructure. You have to solve social the conflicts, and you have to think about expropriation and relocation of the people living in certain areas, and they are all very difficult tasks. And finally, the last challenge might be cybersecurity. If we digitalize everything, it means that we enhance connectivity. But in fact, that means that we are exposed more to the threat, so we have to solve these problems. So in fact, last week I was in Glasgow to participate in COP, and I didn't participate in negotiation, but nevertheless, for the first time in the history of COP, transport ministers gathered in Glasgow to discuss very interesting topics, and I think it was the starting, the inaugural event for the next stages in the transport community. And also we organized side events, and also we collaborated deeply and strongly with the OECD Directorate to create some synergies for these the climate change issues. So I think I have to finish now my scene setting the speech, and now we will listen to the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary General Kim, for those remarks around the mix of policy actions needed if we are to see transport support the transition to net zero. I'm now absolutely delighted to welcome Minister Carlos Eduardo Correa, Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. Prior to serving in this function, he was Deputy Minister of Drinking Water and Sanitation and Mayor of his hometown, Monteria. I'm absolutely delighted to have the Minister with us this afternoon to give us the perspective on the transition effectively and in particular the green recovery in Colombia. Thank you, Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Director Barnsley, Secretary General CORMANN, and Secretary General Dr. Kim for your words and interesting presentations. I want to say hello to Rodolfo Lassi. Hi, Rodolfo. How are you doing today? Nice to see you. We saw each other in Glasgow last week, also with the Secretary General CORMANN. Well, the pandemic changed the way we see the world, as it taught us to act collectively and coordinately to fight an invisible threat. It helped us to understand that we are a resilient society when we put our mind to it and take appropriate action. Likewise, it helped us noticed that environment and ecosystem have an amazing recovery capacity. We enjoyed air quality, and so the animals returned to habitats they have left. And we once again had cities and fields pollution and traffic free. Despite the impacts of the economy and employment, we have come to understand that sustainable recovery is the best opportunity to correct the course of our planet. Last week, many of us were at COP26 working to consolidate climate ambition and designing actions and agreements allowing us not to go beyond the 1.5-degree mark. Therefore, we as humanity have the task to carry out the mitigation and adaptation actions that were spoken about during the country's negotiations and presentations. I have to emphasize that beyond energy transition, there are many ambitious initiatives, programs, and projects countries are making progress on. Nature-based solutions that are very important, expansions of protected areas, vital ecosystem restoration, such as mangroves, corals, circular economy development, electric mobility, among many other actions aimed at accelerating the carbonization of our economy and improving ecosystems. Cities are key players in this transition, and I'd like to share with you how we are achieving this. Today in Colombia, we are implementing 3 very important strategies towards carbon neutrality that will later contribute to sustainable recovery. First one being our biodiversity strategy. Second, our electric mobility strategy. And last but not least, green infrastructure strategy. Biodiversity, one that plans and develops around its ecosystem, turning them into strategic assets to improve the quality of life of citizens. In Colombia, we want to transform 14 cities, capital cities, wherein nature is part of sustainable urban development, thereby contributing to the solution of many environmental, social, and economic problems. In Leticia, the Amazon's capital, for example, clean mobility has been promoted, as well as reducing, reusing, and recycling waste through circular economy. Other Colombian cities have also joined this program to transform green and resilient cities and achieve sustainable development goals towards mitigating climate change. And sustainable mobility is also in place as Colombia launched its electric mobility strategy to boost regulatory, technological, and economic conditions regarding such a transition, and it's been one of the measures most effective we have made significant progress on, as nearly 80% of poor air quality is produced by both public and private transportation. And Secretary General was talking about this. That said, we set ourselves the ambitious goal of having 6,000 registered electric vehicles by 2022, allowing conditions for this number to reach 600,000 by 2030. Such a goal is making significant progress. As of August the 31st, 2021, we had 4,800 registered cars already, meaning the number of electric vehicles has doubled since 2018. Colombia has also become the country with the largest electric public transport fleet in Latin America, one where the electric vehicle market is growing the most in the region. Both strategies will strengthen green and sustainable recovery, thereby creating opportunities and new jobs. The private sector is so important in this process. And in order to achieve these changes, the liability must be collective and with a purpose. We must act now. And to reach this, we need to be faster in the construction of public policies and also from the legislative manner. In Colombia, we have presented a climate action law that incorporates our NDCs and our carbon neutrality strategy to the year 2050. So that in this way, the country has defined a roadmap. As we have accomplished this public policy, we are going to be able to see the impact on the post-COVID economic reactivation, creating new jobs, and I think the most important thing, a new conscience. We are talking now about a new globalization. It's the climate action globalization. And we have to be aware of what's happening. We have to be fast and we have to act now. Thank you very much.
Minister CORREA, I don't know if you can see or hear all of that, but we're warmly clapping you for those of us who are here in presence on site. Thank you very much for those remarks around the Colombian perspective on the green recovery, also the role of cities in sustainable development and with the focus on biodiversity, electromobility and green infrastructure. Very inspiring. I'm now very pleased to welcome Mayor Sharon DIJKSMA to speak on the experience of the city of Utrecht. She is the Mayor of Utrecht, and prior to this she held the position of State Secretary for Infrastructure and the Environment, and separately State Secretary for Economic Affairs, and previously State Secretary for Education, Culture and Science of the Netherlands. We're delighted to have you with us also virtually. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Today, actually, the Paris City Council is discussing a rather revolutionary bicycle plan for the city. And it means that Paris wants to give priority to the bicycle if it's adopted. Then Paris, I would say, will experience a historic moment. Cyclists and pedestrians in particular are the future of urban mobility, I believe. Last week, I was at the COP in Glasgow and I had a clear message. Cities are the drivers for change. And just imagine, in 2050, 70% of the world's population will actually live in cities. And with all that built up area, countless transport movements and mass production and mass consumption with ditto air pollution and heat stress, cities are leaving a gigantic ecological footprint. And let's be clear, it's up to cities to do something about this. But however, I have to also say that we cannot do this alone. Dutch municipalities, for instance, need €1.5 billion for climate measures only until 2024. And at this moment, €72 million has been paid out by the national government. So I think that it is honest to say that the funding that we receive from national governments is inadequate. And so here too, I say to the leaders or the representatives of national governments, please, ladies and gentlemen, put your money where your mouth is. In the Netherlands, people who are vulnerable feel threatened by the impending measures. And they are also the ones that have to make all the sacrifices. So cities must help these people by making them the first to benefit from the advantages that green measures will have in the long run. And when you do that, cities become the key to change. We are the implementers of the climate approach, and many cities are already, we have heard from Colombia, from all other countries over the world, we are already daring to take serious steps towards sustainable, green and healthy solutions. I mentioned Colombian capital, Bogota. This heavily polluted city chose radically for the bicycle a few years ago. And other cities like Rome, Milan, Tokyo, and Rio de Janeiro also are discovering, maybe even through COVID, the advantages of using bicycles in the city. So we are the implementers of the climate approach and can be the key to change. Many cities are already daring to take serious steps in the sustainable, green and healthy solutions. And When I look, for instance, at the Paris cycling plans, I recognize the ambitions of my own city, Utrecht. For years, we have been at the top of the world rankings for cycling cities. In Utrecht, there are more bicycles than inhabitants, and the city provides extra facilities for those who cannot afford a bicycle or are still unable to cycle. And as a result, we actually had the first world bicycle traffic jam. And every city must always make the most of its available space. And that calls obviously for thinking ahead, looking at the future and making clear choices. And Utrecht is making those choices by putting health at the heart of all its policies. Because we believe that this is the only way to make our city future-proof for future generations. And that means also making radical choices when it comes to mobility, but also using green space and biodiversity much more strategically in urban development. In short, the healthy urban living through healthy urban planning. And it means making hard choices. For example, we demolished a 12-lane highway that ran right through our city center and restored the ancient and original city canal. So the inner city is now once again surrounded by a 5 kilometers of water canal. And in a place where polluting cars used to drive, you can now enjoy greenery and water in the heart of the city. And the opening was last year during the COVID pandemic, and it proved a resounding success. From day one, walking along the canal was a success for all those who sat at home and sought relaxation and a little bit of freedom, so to say, in the open air. And our city cycle path network is fully integrated into all our infrastructure. And in some places, there are so many cyclists that the car has to give away to the bicycle. And we redesign the streets specifically for cyclists and for pedestrians. And under our central station, we have built the 2 largest bicycle parking facilities, covering actually 3 floors, 12,500 places for bikes. And many of the good ideas and innovations are not of our own invention, but arise from inviting partners to think along with us. And now we form a part of business model, and we are in the top 3 of the most competitive regions in Europe for years. Innovative, sustainable companies want to be in Utrecht. So big changes, as you all know, usually start small. Most of the times even at the kitchen table. I'm not only a mayor, but also a mother. So I spend my time there. And one of our residents, for example, came up with a smart charging station that enables electric cars and shared cars to supply power back to the energy network. And now Renault and Tesla have also collaborated on this. And this makes Utrecht the first bidirectional region in the world. And we have the highest number of charging stations and shared cars in the Netherlands. And to be fair, 1,000 smart charging stations in one city, no, that won't save the climate. But if other cities adopt each other's ideas, then we have a whole different ballgame. It's a different story. And therefore, I would say dare to go green, challenge your partners to come up with the ideas and don't be too modest to copy people's ideas. And I hope that we could be an inspiration to other cities, just as some other cities are an inspiration to us. The Belgian city of Ghent, for instance, now is building an even bigger bicycle parking. Maybe Paris will be the cycling capital of the world in a few years. Do I mind? No, I would say on the contrary. It's my message to you today. Meeting our climate targets is not a race to be the first, the best, the biggest, or the smartest, but we have to beat it together, that climate change. And that's why I support more and continued cooperation between cities. So in conclusion, the Mayors Alliance that was concluded during the COP in Glasgow and a hopefully successful European Green Deal are good next steps, and every idea to make cities a little bit more sustainable, greener, healthier, no matter how small, might soon become a big step towards making the world a better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor DIJKSMA. She spoke of inspiration toward the end of her remarks and indeed gave us many different examples of, quite remarkable examples of the way in which Utrecht itself as a city is an inspiration in terms of efforts for how the built environment and transport can support not only a green recovery but a green transition. With this, I'm delighted to introduce our last speaker, Ms. Francesca FRICANO, to speak on the outcomes of COP26 and Italy's experience with the green recovery. Ms. FRICANO is part of the Ministry of Ecological Transition of Italy. She's in fact the Director for European Affairs and International Climate Action. And of course, Italy being the co-chair of COP26 alongside the UK, and also having the G20 presidency this year, which included a very active energy, climate and environment stream. It's been a busy year, I'm sure, for Ms. FRICANO and colleagues. She also leads on climate issues in other fora, including the G20, and we're delighted to have her with us today to reflect on COP26 and Italy's own experiences. Thank you, Ms. FRICANO.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, well, yes, we can hear you well.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to this gathering on one issue that actually was the core, one of the pillars of our presidency during the G20. We had an entire chapter which was dedicated both to recovery in general terms, but also on the role of cities in recovery and in championing the transformations that we are all looking for. So I'm very glad to hear that a lot of things are happening, and I invite also to get back to the conclusions of the G20, which highlight many actions and policies that countries are invited to put in place in order to advance the use of the recovery fund and the role of cities as champion for neutrality. So this is very relevant. In terms of COP26, well, I think that a lot has been said about the result of COP26. I would avoid in speculating whether COP26 was a success or whether it was not. I think that sometimes people tend to forget or misunderstand what it meant, what a COP is meant to be, and what the COP can deliver. Indeed, it's an intergovernmental and multilateral process with all the limits, but also the positive aspect of it. And its purpose is to keep at the same table a diverse number of countries with very different political and economic priority. And its main purpose is to find incremental solution. And in this sense, I believe that COP26 did deliver a very good result. If you look at the Glasgow Climate Pact, it outlines very clearly a forward-looking process for accelerating ambition on both mitigation, adaptation, and finance, and also loss and damage. And we have complete the Paris rule book with the outcome on regulating the carbon market, the time frame for NDCs, and the transparency, which is a very important piece of the Paris Agreement, because it's the pieces that make a country accountable for what they declare. And all over, I think COP26 respond to, after several years of discussions and following the result of the G20, to the famous call of science, the IPCC report on closing the gap towards the famous 1.5, by setting up a work program to scale up mitigation ambition. And that will need to be considered at next COP, so in 1 year from here. which means calling on countries who have not done so to communicate their enhanced NDCs or their long-term strategy by COP27, which will be in Egypt next year. And on the other side, requesting those who have already presented their NDC to strengthen their programs in order to be aligned with what science is requesting us. So, and together with that, there was also, the call and the recognition of the need of action on fossil fuels, and besides, the weakening at the very last minute. In any case, it remains the very first time in which at the COP we resolved, to agree on accelerating the energy transition in this decade. And the decade, it's the part which is really very relevant. There was also, of course, the Leaders Summit, which brought a lot of announcements and a lot of actions in many issues. But let's remind, for example, which is relevant to the fora of today. The issues we are discussing today is the maritime sectors, controlling emissions also for the transport in maritime sector, aviation, and transport in general, with the discussion, of course, on the electrification and the racket on electric vehicles. As I was saying before, the important thing now is how to translate those commitments into reality, in real policies, incorporate them in the NDC, and make everybody accountable. And this need to be done before 2022, because at COP27 we will have to assess whether the promises that were made and the actions that were announced at COP26 are indeed starting being a reality. So Glasgow at the end has defined the current decade needs, and this decade needs to be the decade of climate actions. And that's why the decision that governments will make today are crucial in order to achieve those results. And this is the reasons why we need to work on the recovery. The recovery are really a unique opportunity for countries to, as we say, build back better or better, build forward better, which means, putting in place plans and actions that put us in the right pathway towards the 1.5. So it's, as we stated very clearly also at the G20, this is a unique opportunity, and countries need not to lose that way of enhancing their actions on climate change, but not only mitigation, and it's also adaptation, because let's remind that adaptation, whatever is going to happen, is going to be a very important piece of action on climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. FRICANO. I'm pleased to say that we have a little bit of extra time, so I'm delighted to hand over to our director, Rodolfo Lacey, to lead some questions to the panel. Thank you.
Yes, we have here some questions for the panelists. Thank you very much. Regarding this COVID-19 pandemic, Director FRICANO was talking about the influence of the pandemic in the definition of the policies. There is a question on how this is happening. How do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced the debate around green growth and sustainable development? Have the priorities changed? If so, how? This is, of course, influencing your policies, your programs, and of course the long-term strategies that you were talking about. So perhaps we can start with Dr. Kim.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for this interesting question. In fact, during the pandemic, I think we experienced two things. So first is that we learned that the problem came from kind of reckless development of human beings invading our natural shelters, and we crossed the line a bit that caused a lot of the danger for the human life. So we learned that seriously, And also at the same time, during the lockdown period, especially when I was staying at home, I felt that the air could be really cleaner, because I felt that, because before, theoretically, we knew that air could be cleaner, but every day we saw the fewer cars on the street and people didn't really move around. And so finally we learned that we could achieve certain goals. So we already experienced the ideal situation of our air quality in a sense. So I think that really had an echo on policy the makers. But talking about our policy implementations, because these days we always say from ambition to action, and we have to act now. But as I mentioned, easier said than done. But we, ITF, for example, try to provide some evidence, the impact, quantifiable impact of the government measures. So we launched it during the pandemic period, interestingly in July last year, the TCAT, Transport Climate Action Directorate, containing more than 60 measures that government can use. And every measure provides quantifiable impact of CO2 reductions. So we know that in each country the situation is different from one society to another. But at least if we use this measure, we can at least predict how much CO2 reduction can be done. So some country can combine several different measures. But during this COP period, we added 20 more. So now we have 86 measures that government can use, and they can really facilitate policymakers to conceive and implement the specific measures. And we are faced with the difficulty of governance system, as we mentioned, and city government is doing some measures, and central government takes different actions. But in the end, if we have a reference like that, perhaps we can reach a certain consensus more easily. So I think ITF is continuing to provide that measures.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. I am not seeing the screen here, but Minister CORREA, are you there? Sorry. If not, can I ask Mayor DIJKSMA? Oh, here is there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodolfo. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias, Rodolfo. Well, I think that, you know, pandemic helped us creating collective awareness as to how environment becomes relevant to economic development. As people were experiencing difficult situations, as humans, family, and society, nature became the refugee. And it made evident the urgency of taking climate action collectively. It out the green growth and sustainable development debate at the very center of private companies and governments. I think, Rodolfo, that the most important thing for us now is to have a clear north. In Colombia, we have two big challenges, two big goals that are to be carbon neutral by 2050 and nature positive. And when you have a collective purpose, it's easier to do it. Definitely, COVID, you know, changed the priorities for the governments, for our countries, for the private sector, for us as human beings. And we have to understand. And the only way to do it is to have a purpose. Now we have to change our habits to have a better life. We have to be now faster. We have to think different. We have to put in the center of that, you know, technology. We have to do things different. We have to get out of the box and realize that this is happening. And COVID made us, you know, have more conscious about what's happening. So the private sector here, you know, it plays a very important role for this recovery. But what I wanted to say is that definitely the priorities have changed. We as a leaders have to be part of it, have to have more leadership to change. Now, as I told you, we need to be more responsible with ourselves. It's the only way to have a better life. And to finish, I want to say again, we need policies, we need legislation, and we need action. Because if we don't do that, you know, it's going to change, you know, government as government, and people is not expecting that. People wants to work forward to 2030, 2040, 2050. We have to give hope to people, and as a leaders, we have to do it with legislation and public policy.
Indeed. Yes, we saw in many Colombian cities that now the people is willing to use electromobility or electric modes of transportation. This is changing, of course, the way we are seeing the transportation sector, because now we have different options. More of them are very clean. New technologies that are in the market, and the private sector is promoting and receiving, by the way, support from the recovery programs. So as Dr. Kim was saying, is quite a relevant change, not only in the minds of the users, but also in the long run or in the vision of the citizens. Mayor DIJKSMA, I remember you promoting electromobility in the COP21. You also were a minister facilitating many discussions for the Paris Agreement. I'm happy to see you again. Do you have any thoughts now that you are taking decisions, implementing the Paris Agreement in the field?
Well, I have to say that it is not easy. In my statement, I told national governments to put their money where their mouth is. And actually what we see all over is that that not happens at the moment. Yes, the plans are there. The good inspirations are there. I think the ambitions are there. But to accommodate sustainable and green options, we need to collaborate actually extensively. And that means that cities, private partners, national governments, industries all need to be focused on the same agenda. And I think that at the moment, you saw this also in the outcome of Glasgow, that we're missing some chances. And that is worrying me actually a little bit, because I am an optimistic person. I was there in Paris as a minister for the environment, as you mentioned, and I was at that time like overwhelmed by the idea that we were at that time really making a big change in history. And that when I would have some grandchildren later on, I would be able to tell them I was there at that moment. And I really, on behalf of not only the Netherlands, but also Europe, was able to do my thing and negotiate. But yeah, if you look at the past 6 years, the steps we took, they were just too little. So we need to step up. We need to make a better strategy. We need to get the funding right. And I know there is enough money. It's not only, the only thing, it's not divided right sometimes. And that is something we could manage. So at the end of the time, I would say I'm not that pessimistic. I know we can make things done and we make the difference. But we need to partner a lot more than we do. And the sense of urgency actually needs not to fade away.
Indeed, yes. Director FRICANO, you are a gender leader. Are you there? Can you give us some thoughts?
I'm here. Yeah. Yes, I'm here. In terms of your first question, I think there are two issues that are that we can draw from the COVID experience, with which honestly hasn't even yet finished. It's how fragile we are, how our system can be put it down by such big challenges, and how it is important to cooperate and work together. If the researchers all around the world didn't work together, probably today we wouldn't find ourselves in the situation, in the better situation we are in combating this huge challenge of the COVID. And I think this is we can apply these two issues also to the climate change, which is indeed another global and urgent challenge that we all need to work together. And has demonstrated how fragile we can be. If you look around the world, what's happening in any country, not only in developing countries, but also happening here in Europe, it's happening everywhere. You know, the climate is changing, and the impact of those change are felt by everybody. And I very much agree with Minister Correa, as well as the mayor of the city of Utrecht. Environment is at the core of it, and the role of cities, the role that city has played also during the pandemic, show us how it's important to make our environment, the environment in where we live, suitable for the challenge at that. And in terms I read one question that is in the chat, how this decade is going to be different from the past one. I think it will be different because the urgency of the situation and the knowledge of the challenges of climate change is much greater than back in when we were in Paris in 2015. And the civil society and the young call on action is that strong and is that pushy that they will make us accountable in our promises and in our action. And so losing the opportunity of using the recovery would be really something that would make us not accountable. In terms of what Italy is doing, we have already approved a plan which has a value of 235 million euro, and 40% of this plan is going to be devoted for the green transition. There are a lot of projects on the pipeline which are devoted also to city and transport in terms of energy efficiency of building, in electric, building the infrastructure for electric, cycling pathway, a lot of projects also on the adaptation side, because as I was saying, adaptation is we're not talking only about mitigation, but we need to talk also of the adaptation, because no matter what we are going to do, and even if we will be succeeded in keeping the temperature to 1.5, anyway adaptation, we will have to adapt to a certain situation. So it is important also to talk a lot about adaptation.
Thank you so much, Director FRICANO. Well, that concludes our first opening session this afternoon. Director General Kim, Minister CORREA, Mayor DIJKSMA, and Director FRICANO, on behalf of Director Lacey, myself and the Secretary General, we'd like to thank you sincerely for your inspirational words this afternoon. We've discussed possibilities for innovation and policy action in the built environment and in transport to really set the stage for the 5 sessions that will follow over the next couple of days. We've looked at the outlooks and opportunities in the transportation sector, in particular with Director General Kim, national and city perspectives with Minister CORREA and the Mayor DIJKSMA, and the role of international collaboration. And a number of our panellists have touched in particular on the consequences and outcomes of COP26 and how we must take that forward in the years ahead. Our next session will be after a short break at 3:20 Central European Time on urban transport and city design. So we hope many of you will log in for that session. It will be followed this afternoon and in the coming 2 days by sessions on rethinking sustainable tourism, energy efficiency and the built environment, greening medium and long distance for transport, and tracking and analysing green recovery measures. So please do join us virtually or in person for the following sessions, and our thanks again to the panellists for this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.